So in this video, I want to talk about meltdowns and the neurotypical spouse's subsequent retribution for the meltdown. I had a question here from an NT, and I'm just going to summarize. She's basically asking what should she do in the way of confrontation or setting boundaries with her autistic husband when he has meltdowns. So one of the most important things for NT spouses to realize is that the meltdown and the shutdowns really, but we'll talk about meltdowns here, is a trait of the disorder. But because meltdowns can often look like just a plain old adult temper tantrum, it's sometimes difficult to know what course of action to take. So that's totally understandable. And to make matters worse, a particular behavior may be meltdown related on one occasion, but it may be just a full-blown temper tantrum on a different occasion. So people on the autism spectrum can obviously avoid having a rage episode, but they can't avoid meltdowns. They cannot avoid meltdowns as much as they would like to. And they often hate the aftermath of that as much as anybody else does. So the best thing that you can do as an NT is, in concert with him, try to reduce the damage. And in cases where you can eliminate the damage would be even better, but then we have to think in terms of prevention. Intervention, once that meltdown has taken off, it's too late. That bullet has already left the gun. So for you to exact retribution for a spouse who has a meltdown is like punishing someone for swearing when they hit their thumb with a hammer. It won't do any good whatsoever, and it will only serve to increase the distance between you and your autistic spouse. In addition, meltdowns aren't wholly caused by the current scenario, but are usually the result of an overwhelming number of other issues. The one that causes the meltdown is simply the straw that breaks the camel's back. So unless you're a mind reader, you won't necessarily know what the other factors are, and your autistic spouse may not even be able to fully communicate the problem. Because if he has alexithymia and mind blindness, he's going to be out of touch with his feelings and perhaps his triggers. A meltdown is a condition where the individual temporarily loses control due to emotional responses to environmental factors. It could be anxiety, and most often is. It could be social frustration, sensory sensitivities, and so on. Now, it generally appears that the autistic spouse has lost control over a single and specific issue. It certainly looks like that, right? But this is very rarely the case. Usually the problem is an accumulation of a number of irritations, which honestly could span a fairly long period of time, particularly given the strong long-term memory that people on the autism spectrum are known to have. Furthermore, the problems may seem hidden due to several things. For example, people on the spectrum don't tend to give a lot of clues that they're irritated. Oftentimes, his grievances are aired as part of his normal conversation and may be interpreted by you as a part of his standard complaining. Some things that annoy people on the spectrum would not be considered annoying to others, which makes NT spouses less likely to pick up on a potential problem. People on the spectrum, their facial expressions very often will not convey frustration, and their vocal tones will often remain flat, even though they may be highly agitated in the moment. Now, some people on the autism spectrum, when they describe their meltdowns, they describe it as a red or gray band across the eyes. This is a loss of control and a feeling of being a powerless observer outside the body. Now, this can be dangerous as the individual may strike out, particularly if the instigator is nearby or if the autistic individual is taunted or confronted during a meltdown. Now, sometimes depression is the only outward visible sign of a meltdown. At other times, depression results when the individual leaves his meltdown state and confronts the results of his meltdown. The depression is a result of guilt over abusive or violent behavior, which may result in a shutdown. Sometimes the best thing an NT wife can do is to, in concert with her husband, learn his meltdown triggers, recognize them when they're starting to appear, employ prevention before the meltdown happens. So again, we have to think in terms of prevention, and intervention is too late. That storm is just going to have to ride itself out. Now, one way to do this if your autistic husband is okay with it, is to discreetly videotape a meltdown and allow him to watch it after he has calmed down. People on the spectrum, as you probably know, are very visual and learn best from images and videos. Now, once he has had his meltdown that was video recorded, the two of you then can discuss the incident, explain why it isn't socially acceptable, and the two of you can work on some alternatives. So even though a meltdown is a trait, that's not a license to go around spraying on people like a skunk. He needs to know that it is distressing to you and the children, if you have any. And again, in concert with him, you would want to come up with a relatively short list of meltdown triggers and get into the business of prevention.